Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Mission Matters Business Podcast, your source for all things business. My name is Adam Torres. You can follow me on Instagram at AskAdamTorres. Keep up with my book releases, book tour schedule, signings, all that other good stuff. Always love to connect with you there. And as always, if you'd like to apply to become a co-author of one of my upcoming books, just head on over to the website, missionmatters.com, and click on Become an Author to apply. All right, so today I have Jerry Skees on the line, and he's Chief Strategy Officer and Director over at Global Parametrics. Jerry, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right, so just to kick us off, let's get a little bit further into what you're doing over at Global Parametrics. Tell us a little bit more about the company, please.
Yeah, certainly. We are a science-based company that manages a fund, and we organize structures in order to finance natural disasters. So we actually can forecast, monitor, and finance natural disasters with a major focus really in low and middle income countries, because our primary investors at this stage have been the British government and the German government, with a purpose to actually extend these markets into emerging economies.
And so what typically happens, let's go a little bit further into why this is so important, because when a natural disaster happens into some of these developing areas that are, let's just say, just gaining some traction on maybe infrastructure or some other things, and then a disaster happens, it kind of puts them right back to it sets them back quite a bit. Let's go a little bit further into the problem there and why government should be so keen to invest and to think about things like this.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we recognize in the United States and most developed countries is the government has resources to really pitch in when there is a disaster, and we see good response from FEMA in the United States. But when you are working with countries that are lower income, the governments are not in that same position. So the big challenge is, as you mentioned, when you have a disaster, it's very disruptive all across the society. It disrupts livelihoods of the poor. The poor suffer the most, which is pretty much the story in the United States as well when there is a disaster. And there's just a significant need for governments and private sector to collaborate in a way where they can be responsive and build resiliency against these events through science and through actual structures that allow entities within the emerging economies to transfer the risk in the global markets. And that's what we do.
Let's talk a little bit more on what that transfer of risk looks like, because it's a huge. It's a big problem you're looking to solve or to contribute to solving, I should say. Let's talk a little bit more about what that transfer of risk looks like.
Yeah, certainly. So we have insurance markets, and we have interesting developments over the last 25 years or so. There's been something called catastrophe bonds, where equity investors can actually invest in natural disasters. Really interesting idea, right? Because what happens with a hurricane off the eastern seaboard is not correlated with typical activity in equity trades on the stock market. So it's a nice diversified portfolio. We see pension fund investors and lots of convergence of capital markets. We're right in the nexus of doing that type of thing for the emerging economies that have been largely left behind with the innovations that have happened in the Northern Hemisphere, both in terms of the capital market conversions and also the science. So we're trying to bring innovation into these markets that's quite similar to what's been motivating markets and having the ability to actually transfer these risks. So to the point, if a hurricane hits Florida or an earthquake hits California, those insurance companies have got to have the wherewithal to pass that big risk off into the global markets. And that's a really important part of risk management for natural disasters, is actually being able to slice and dice and push that risk off into these global markets. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with the emerging economies, which have largely been left behind in these innovations. So that's the reason that we were founded. I'm the founder. I started this process some years ago. And the British and German governments came in and said, yes, we're interested in exactly that problem. And so they've invested in us at this point, and we're soon to be out trying to raise new capital. So exciting times for Global Parametrics, in fact.
So speaking of raising capital, so is this only for governments to invest in, or are accredited investors able to invest? Or, I mean, give us a little bit of scope of that.
Yeah, certainly. This is the capital we seek now is private sector. We had the public sector investment early, and for purpose, because there were a lot of things that had to be done that needed patient capital. And now we're up and going, and it's time for us to reach into the private sector and demonstrate what we've done. And we're really interesting for the major global markets because we're also doing this environmental sustainable green in a really significant way. So the ESG dimensions of Global Parametrics are extremely interesting for the capital markets. And that's what's going to make things really interesting for us in the next 6 months as we go out and start a capital campaign very soon.
Oh, that's awesome. Can you talk a little bit about the science behind what you're doing? So, meaning you mentioned there's advancements in science and things that have been kind of like have left some of these markets behind. Can you give us just a hint of that?
Yeah, sure. You know, there's so much work has been done to actually forecast our weather, and these numerical models are global models that use so many different pieces of information, satellite information, monitoring the sea temperature and, you know, the circulations of the climate. And those models are getting better and better. And the ability to actually forecast an extreme event in advance is so important to help people prepare, for one thing, but also just the financing part. We're going to actually structure contracts that would pay before disaster. And we've got a few of those in play right now. So that aspect of the science, we've got the global data. We're a big science company. We have global data, gridded data for the whole planet. It's publicly available. We've processed it in unique ways. It includes the climate data. It includes earthquakes. It includes tropical cyclones. And we're even doing some work with volcanoes with third parties. We do flood modeling. We do drought, earth. So it's quite a spectrum of the type of risks that we're focused on. But the science and actually having that organized in a scientific platform with scientists on our team makes us reasonably unique, because we also have the other side of the scale, which is to bring that structure into the financial markets and transfer that risk.
Man, that's completely unique, and I was hoping that's what you're talking about in terms of just where technology's gone and weather and predict and just what's taking place. I'm laughing to myself because I'm thinking to myself, you know, we've come a long way from the days of when I was a kid and thinking about the weather forecaster and whether it was going to rain or not. I mean, in a very simple example of that, Jerry, is I'm like, man, I never really considered that. My weather app is pretty dang on point nowadays. Like, I know that's a really simple example compared to what you're doing, but in my mind, I think there's a lot of people listening right now that haven't really considered how accurate things have gotten, because it just happened behind the scenes. Like, we didn't really know what was happening, unless that's your business, of course, like you. But for the everyday guy, the guy behind a podcast, or the guy that's going to work and working on their projects, they're probably not like thinking about that.
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic what's going to happen even in the next years. It's really about big data and the variety of big data that you organize in order to understand the exposure on the planet and to understand the drivers that really create the damage. So we're putting those two things together all the time for any geography on the planet. And as we advance and these models keep getting better, we can write contracts that would pay before the problem. Imagine that. You're talking about paying somebody before the disaster. So rather than paying for losses, you're actually paying to prevent losses. That's a big part of my dream. And we did something like that in Peru some years ago with an El Nino product that actually was the first insurance product that paid before the El Nino created flooding in the northern part of Peru. So we know we could do this. It's real exciting.
Well, that is really exciting. So, Jerry, that being said, if somebody's listening to this and they want more information on parametrics, I mean, what's the best way for them to get that info?
Yeah, they can get on our web page. It's globalparametrics.com. And there's several links there, but you can also just shoot an email, even to me. My email is jskees@globalparametrics.com. And that's SKEES.
Fantastic. Well, hey, Jerry, really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing more about all the great work that you're doing over at Global Parametrics. And to the audience, as always, thank you for tuning in. Hope you got a lot of value out of this. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave me a review on the Apple iTunes Store. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, Mission Matters Money, definitely give us a subscribe there, but also leave us some comments on the video. I mean, love to know what kind of projects and things that you're working on. And Jerry, thanks again for coming on the show.